looking at a crystal ball for what gaming looks like a year from now. So I'm going to let this star-studded panel introduce themselves. Do you want to kick us off, Zach?
Yeah, I'm Zach Kubin. I work at Adelaide. We do attention measurement for brands and for agencies and for publishers.
Thanks.
Vanessa, VP of Programmatic Revenue Strategy and Operations, SAG.
Hi everyone, I'm Aditi Ramesh. I am at Anzu. We are an in-game SSP, and I'm our Director of Programmatic and Partnerships.
Hi everyone, Andrew Cassin, Senior Director, Agency and Enterprise at Equativ. Equativ is a full-stack technology platform serving both brands, agencies, and publishers.
And I'm Zoe Soon, VP of the Experience Center at IAB, which focuses on emerging advertising platforms, gaming being one of them. Okay, let's start off with something fun. What are your gamer names? Do you want to kick us off, Andrew?
Sure. So my gamer tag name, coincidentally, was also my AIM screen name, and it is CastWatch75.
My gamer name is Shop Aditi because I own a website, shopaditi.com, so you guys should go buy some candles.
Humble brag advertising.
My gamer name, also my social media handle, email address at one point is wonderfulness.
Oh, that's so positive.
I don't have a gamer name.
But if you had one?
It would be Z Kubin. Just my initials, because I'm completely unoriginal and I have nothing else to share with you. We'll figure it out. We'll figure out my gamer name. By the end of the day, I'll have a gamer name.
Mine's Fizzgidget, just because I like the way it sounded. It sounded like nothing, but it sounded fun. Okay, let's get to it. We all know that gaming is popular across generations, and that with younger generations, it's the new social. How do we see the gamer audience evolving in the next year? Andrew, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah. So I think it's not so much that the gaming audience is going to evolve in the U.S. Like in the U.S., I think it's just in general that the perception of what makes up the gaming audience and what it pertains and what it consists of is going to be more and more realized with the efforts that have been done, across the industry, across different players. So I think that people are going to start to realize that the gaming audience is a lot more diverse and a lot more niche than they may realize. I think there's a lot of perception of, in the industry that's been kind of debunked in terms of what makes up a gamer. And so I think that people are starting to realize that the gaming audience is, by the end of 2024, my little prediction is that I think the gaming audience will almost be even keel 50-50 male and female. I think it's also, I think the number is like 73% of US gamers are Caucasian, but even though that number seems daunting, I think the realization is also that 10% of them are Hispanics, and then also the fact that 73% of African Americans, 13 and up, play video games. So the reality is that the gaming audience is much more diverse than I think brands and agencies realize, and the opportunity to reach them in a more effective media channel like gaming is something that they now have the opportunity to take advantage of.
And I think that the gaming audience is obviously very large, so big, but the opportunity here is now to make them an addressable audience that you can then target. So how do we make that visible? How do we make that accessible? How do we make that targetable is really what we need to do now. We already know the gaming audience is huge. So what's next? How do we build to make sure that we can actually address them? That's where I want to see in the next 6 months to the next 12 months for us to be able to make those strides so that we don't have to keep talking about how gaming is where we should put our dollars. It's how do we put our dollars there?
Yep, I would definitely have to kind of second all of that. I think when you mention like generational in terms of gaming, it's all age demographic, depending on how you identify as what type of gamer you are. So I was just mentioning to Zach earlier before, like my children identify as a gamer because they played Roblox, they played Minecraft. I actually found out of Roblox through my son, which is I know terrible because I'm in the gaming industry. But how I identify as a gamer is more like nostalgic, right? Like I think of like N64, Tetris, Mario Kart, Super Smash Brothers. So I have a different identity. And I think depending on where you fall on the spectrum of how you identify as a gamer, it's like a different whole age demographic, also a different type of games that you also play with.
I don't have much of a perspective on gaming. A lot of what we're focusing on is on measurement in certain environments, display only video. But for us, when we think about attention, gaming is obviously an environment that's very heavily geared towards an attentive experience. One of the things that we see about audiences is that audiences that are younger typically pay less attention than older audiences. So how do you, as a marketer, as an advertiser, think about ways to reach these folks where their attention is fleeting, right? Their environments, they want to get to the next thing. How do you add value to that experience? And that's something that we're thinking about.
Nice. So we're seeing some of the stereotypes go away. We know that we're going to tap into this audience. We're seeing differences in how the demographics are, the more immersive forms in the younger demographics, obviously with Roblox and Fortnite, attention to great place. What do we think some of the challenges are going to be in 2024? Aditi, looks like you're going to...
Yeah, like balancing monetization with good quality experience for a gamer is going to continue to be a challenge and something that we have to be really, really cognizant of. So being aware of the creative best practices. These are all things that if we don't understand as marketers and we don't understand what gamers want, what game developers need, how to clean up ad markups within bid responses so that there's no JavaScript in there, then those are all sort of challenges that are going to be in place. And I think it's just a challenge to make sure everyone is educated, right? So that we get that information out there so that, in a year from now, every single trader should know how to activate a intrinsic in-game campaign. So how do we get there? It's like, we just have to educate.
Any other challenges?
Yeah, no, I think the positive aspect that a lot of brands and agencies can take away from this is that the challenges that we had a year ago are much less than we have today, and I think they'll be even less so a year from now in terms of a lot of the things that I think a year ago were worried about, like fraud and viewability and how to measure and ensuring that games can be in brand safe environments, and as well as understanding like that are they intrusive or interrupting the gameplay. Like all of those worries have been addressed by people on this panel here, by the IAB, and by other industry players, on the measurement side as well. So I think the positive takeaway from that is definitely that we've addressed a lot of the problems. I think now it's continuing. I think the biggest problem and challenge that we'll have really is just education and continuing to educate. And I think collaboration. I think one of the things that as an industry, I think we're so worried about acronyms and what DSPs are becoming SSPs and what SSPs are becoming DSPs and what, who's going straight to publishers. And I think the reality is like, we haven't spent enough time as an industry collaborating on things like getting in-game advertising, getting gaming advertising in general to where it could be a year from now. It takes just conversation. I think at the end of the day, imagine where we could be in other industries and how far we could be moving in the channels that are talked about so much today. If there was just more collaboration between industry players that maybe are in competitive sets, but bring value to the supply chain and bring value to clients on both sides of the space.
How do you do that? Right? So like when you put media in a gaming environment, what are the outcomes that some of your clients are after? Right? Like one of the things that we're challenged with is how do we put our measurement into an environment that is frankly not easy to measure? Right? So when this is maybe want to pass it over them. When you guys have clients that come in and say, hey, I want to put media with folks that you guys are monetizing, what are the goals that they have for those campaigns? You mentioned measurement as a challenge, which is something that we're faced with at Adelaide.
Are you asking like what objectives are they going
to?
Yeah,
what are they trying to do? If measurement is indeed a challenge, like how do you prove the value of what gaming provides to your clients?
We work with a lot of various vendors that you might be familiar with, right? So Human, we have now our first market solution with IAS for measuring 3D viewability and making sure that brand safety is kept intact. We have relationships with Moat. You can now utilize IAB standard creative sizes to be able to purchase 300 by 250s and 480 by 320s inside games. So being able to take what standards are in place for display, video, CTV, the same types of brand lift partners, same type of measurement partners, and working really closely with them and saying, hey, maybe we should work together in like a working group with the IAB, and maybe we should all talk about how we should do bid enrichment for in-game. What are seller-defined audiences for publishers inside games? So while we're doing these things, then those standards are put in place, MRC, IAB, we can all establish some of these practices, and then publishers, supply partners, we can all kind of get together and curate that inventory in a way that's accessible. So that's sort of how like we have to do this. There's no easy way. It's just like we got to just put our minds together and put on some stuff on a whiteboard and see what happens.
And when I think about mobile, which we never thought was going to overtake desktop when it came out because it was a tiny screen and people didn't know what the purpose was, but because there was so much consumer demand and so much consumer attention and time spent, we worked out the problems and we worked out the challenges. So I think the similar thing will happen. There's just going to be so much attention and time going to gaming that we'll just have to work out the challenges.
Yeah, and I think it's not, I think that's what, working with clients, it's an education process of understanding. It's not it may not be a one-size-fits-all strategy, knowing what their objectives are. If they're trying to if they're trying to hardcore performance, if they want hardcore, or hardcore performance measurements like CTR and those types of things, then maybe in-game isn't necessarily the best channel for that, but there are other ways to achieve gaming with things like rewarded video and interstitials and achieving those same types of things. And and then if you really want to focus on brand awareness and really getting out of that kind of mindset of the banner blindness of like just standard display and desktop is, gaming can be just as achievable a challenge to achieve the brand awareness metrics that you want, as well as it being, like Zach was saying, in a more attentive, more engaged environment versus like you're scrolling through content where that ad is there, but it's not quite there. Whereas when you're in a game, you're seeing something that billboard is part, that billboard is part of the race that you're doing in the game, or that banner is on the stadium of the game you're playing, and you notice it, and you have that kind of recall of that image later on. So I think it is the ability to kind of work up the funnel with your clients and understand what's going to work and what's not, because it doesn't all work.
It's almost like it's harder to kind of prove ROI in specific performance metrics, because if you're thinking, you being a consumer, you're a gamer and you see an ad, you're playing the game, it's more of a brand awareness attention. So I almost feel like we have to kind of take a step back, because if you think like historically there's been such a focus on like viewability and engagement metrics, but it's like having the conversation of like more it's a brand awareness type campaign as opposed to specific KPIs of like a CTR or like time spent in terms of how and where they saw that ad within that game experience.
Yeah, one of the things that we struggle with is that specific thing, right? Yeah. Brands are after things like viewability, they're after things like time spent. But if viewability is just, hey, I'm going to put this ad on screen for some arbitrary period of time and just hope that it works, is that generating any brand impact? Is that generating effectiveness? And these are questions that we get asked a lot. Gaming is something that we don't do currently, right? We're not in an in-game environment. So when we talk to brands, we talk to agencies, the first question they ask is, well, if we put money into branding in games, how do we know it's going to move the needle for us? And this is a challenge that we have in our company too.
I think we're trying to retrofit old currency to new behaviours, and in gaming is such a rich storytelling medium that you don't really capture it with viewability.
I have just a quick question on this related topic. Like, what are your guys' perspective in terms of brand lift vendors that are out there? There are a few that we have been kind of exploring, because to your point, it's like a lot of them are saying like, what's the brand lift from our ad being within that immersive experience? Like, what do you guys think is, as far as some of these like vendors that have been kind of like out there now that are like pitching it?
The question is the incentives that you get when you answer a survey, right? Like if it's, hey, in order for you to reach this next level, you have to answer this question. Typically people will just be like, I'm going to answer the quickest question I can to get to the next level. So I think everybody has their own methodology in doing it. We work with Disco, and we work with Kantar, we work with Nielsen, we work with all of them. I think the question we want to ask ourselves is, what is the incentive that is being created when you ask somebody to answer a question such that they're asked to do something they want to get to in the next place? And then you have a lot of variability in how they answer, right? And so it's not to say that brand lift isn't good. We work with brand lift providers all the time. It's just, what is the methodology using to get to the question that the brand actually wants to answer?
Two things. One is working really closely with DSP partners also is one thing that like we can do to strengthen some of those challenges. With that, some of the vendors are offered through DSPs, right? So recently I learned about Lucid, for example. There's Kantar, there's a lot of different partners. There's also force exposure versus, right? So understanding exactly where in that user journey we want to exactly capture that. That's what I've discovered, at least.
Okay, well, shifting gears a little bit. The whole industry is talking about attention. It's the hot new kid on the block. I think this is a chance for gaming to move out of the red-headed stepchild role and actually play a lead, because as you said, it's such a high attention environment. What do we think about gaming attention? And
we kind of already talked about it, right? I mean, in gaming, people pay attention because they're gaming. I think that that's pretty obvious. I think the question you want to ask yourself as a marketer is, what role do I want to play in this experience? Like, do I want to complement and augment it? Or do I want to do something that's interruptive but still get my point across? I think when you think about attention in the context of gaming, it's how do I get my message across in a way that is complementing the experience that the brand that the game is providing. So I think what we're trying to do at Adelaide is to understand the nuance between these two things, right? You can put an interstitial on a page for 20 seconds, and it can be there for a long period of time. It doesn't mean that somebody's paying attention to it, right? You can have an ad on screen for 2 seconds, and it could be way more valuable as an experience. So understanding the nuances between those things is what we're after, so that a brand can have confidence if I put between 2 different placements, the yield that I'll get in the 2-second placement might be better for me, so I want to put my dollars there.
Yeah, I think with attention, it's interesting because I think there is this line, like you were saying before, that you don't want to, there's this fine line where you're working on where you want the ad to be immersed in the game, you want it to fit into that environment, you want it to be relevant to the user that it's reaching, and you want it to be personalized, not to the point where it takes away from the gameplay, but it resonates afterwards. And so I think that's that kind of line of like, how do you make an impactful message without impacting the gameplay, without impacting, how that user is, the sentiment that they have to the game and the ad, and obviously making sure that seamlessly doesn't break the experience still. I think what's interesting with attention is like how deep can, attention go in terms of like the different things within attention, like, duration of gaze and like, obviously the eyeball tracking and things like that, where attention almost has its own sub-metrics and becomes this like actual currency that has different facets to it. It's not just attention, it's different aspects within it, and how to measure that, and how that can be something that makes up for the fact that it's not a collectible environment. It's not all these other things that brands would think that it is just because it's an ad in general.
Well, that brings up a controversial question, which I'd love to hear people's position on. Should attention be a currency?
I think the demand side.
I think you physically reacted to that question.
Yeah, well, it's a little warm up here, but we're surviving. Markets are dictated by the demand, right? The buyers will decide what they do and what to pay for it. So if an advertiser goes to a publisher and says, hey, I'm only going to pay you for ads that have a certain level of quality of X, or reach a certain amount of attention score of X, but I'll pay you a lot of money for it, a publisher's going to say, sure, I love that. Like, I can take that risk on providing that inventory back to the buyer so the buyer feels comfortable with the media that I'm offering them. That is a currency, right? And I think if you think about that in the context of how markets operate, if more and more buyers say to the market, this is how I'm going to buy my media, then all of a sudden you've got a currency around quality that the market can transact on.
Okay.
What I don't think you're going to get to is, hey, we're going to make time on screen a currency. That would be ludicrous, because all of a sudden you create the incentive of just ads on screen for long periods of time, and everybody who uses the internet, I assume, to some extent, that would annoy most of the people in the room. Maybe not Mike, but everybody else would not be able. So I think, like, when you talk about currency, just be mindful that markets are dictated by how the buy side chooses to insert incentives, and the supply side will say, sure, I can do that for you.
And then they'll focus on getting that metric met rather than the...
Correct, right. Then they'll get the metric that they want, which they know hopefully correlates to the outcome that they're after, and that is how a marketplace is going to start to function. And I think we're pretty dogmatic about that. Yeah.
I honestly could not see it better. I think Zach got that one.
Yeah, okay. Great, well, we're almost coming up to time. So, last question, and we're going to go down the line. Well, let's start with Vanessa. No, you haven't kicked us off yet. Key wish that you hope to see in the next year as it relates to advertising and gaming?
Could be anything.
Anything. You have a magic wand.
I guess maybe more standardization. I guess because like on the flip side, I kind of would say.
You want me to do more work?
Okay. I mean, maybe a little bit, but I would say like on the flip side to that, I feel like there's a lack of inconsistency in terms of how different brands and agencies are defining what that specific success kind of KPI looks like. And so I think it's going to cause a bit of a confusion specifically on the pub side, because there's going to be different value points in terms of how they want it to be measured. And I think as a publisher, it's going to be be a bit trickier in terms of where those ads are being placed, and depending on the supply that you have or the sites that you have or the games that you have, we're gonna have to kind of take a bit more effort into understanding how to actually kind of get out of that. So I would say it's probably key for me.
I would love to see every single DSP have an intrinsic in-game workflow guide, activation guide, just like how you have for CTV, for direct out of home, make it for gaming. The supply will start to come, right? So starting now and helping use all the best practices that we understand already today and leverage that and do better. We can get a head start on seller-defined audiences in game. We can start passing things through bid enrichment, like game genre. We can even tell you is it a single-player game or is it a multiplayer game. Anything you want, we can pass. But DSPs, agencies, tell your DSPs, help us build for that better future to make transparency possible for intrinsic in-game or gaming in general.
The sales answer for my key wish would be for Equativ to get a healthy chunk of the $90 billion in video game advertising revenue in 2024. But in terms of the key wish, very similar to everyone else has said, the standardization obviously is key. I think it goes back to what I was saying before. I think just more collaboration between industry players, we're servicing the same clients at the end of the day. So DSPs working with SSPs, working with data providers, working with measurement providers, just more collaboration on that front and not it being such a siloed thing in terms of, we're all trying to achieve the same goals. And I think advancing advertising in general, I think a lot more can be done if people work together.
See, I want less standardization, just because chaos is better for everybody. I think the thing that I think most people want from gaming is if I put $1 in the machine for advertising, what do I get in return? Right? And if there's definitive proof that spending money in game drives outcomes for brands, then all this stuff happens. I think the challenge that gaming has is that it functions independently of how measurement can get in there. And that's a challenge. We're not going to solve that problem. So, I'm not. But once transparency around to the quality of the inventory in gaming for advertisers becomes apparent, then all of a sudden, a lot of clients will be like, I can put dollars in here and I'm going to get 5, 10, 15x in return. That's
and
great.
you need some sort of parity so you can compare it across channels. And then some new metrics, right?
If only there was a company that had a metric that provided parity across channels, that would be amazing. Yeah,
right.
All right, I won't plug my company too much, but that's what we do, everybody.
Well, thank you, everyone. I think are we opening up for audience question time? Does anyone have any questions that I'd like to ask these experts up here?
I have a question.
Right?
With the recent, let's just say, change in strategy from Facebook/Meta, they had invested a lot in the metaverse, right? They kind of divested from it. I think it went into a different direction. Threads is a different conversation. What do you think about the future of gaming in terms of virtual reality? Because I think, when I think of games, and I do play a lot even today, personally, I think that if you want to have a good experience with ads, I think it's better to have them high resolution. Right? For example, when I was a kid, right, the ads I remember the most, the brands I remember the most, were usually banners that would be on top of cars. For example, like decals and logos of cars, maybe just banners on the side of racing, that sort of thing. And in VR, I think that could be even more impactful because you have the big screen, because it's essentially in your head, in your eyes, you have it right in front of you. What do you think in terms of VR? Do you think that will be the future, or is it going to be just a distant idea, and for now we'll just have to still face the main spend on mobile games, big invested games? Do you think VR is going to be a big part of that soon enough, or at some point?
Every major product release in VR to date hasn't gained mass market adoption. You've got Apple that's going to obviously take a little bit of a different position when they release their goggles when they're set next year. But the last stat I saw in the metaverse is I think there are more people on this panel right now than there are in the metaverse.
Oh, it depends on what metaverse you're looking at. I think Roblox has.
I'm speaking more specifically to Meta's sort of experimentation networks, right? Roblox, I just learned about 20 minutes ago. It sounds like they're doing a great job. But I think that like the question that you're asking is, let's say VR does take off. Then the question that advertisers have to ask themselves is, what is a suitable ad experience that can run and complement this experience that doesn't just feel like we've done with what we've done with the internet, which is just stick banners everywhere and expect them to be effective. And I think like this is where smarter people than me can step in and say, I can build an ad format that's going to complement the experience and make people happy to engage with my ads, be better for my brand and better for the experience. And I think that will be good. What would be bad is if, what I just said, like somebody sticks a 720 up and I need a VR experience, so like, oh, we're killing it. You're not. You're killing the ad experience, but you're not killing the game.
Anzu's SDK is compatible with any gaming engine.
The fact that you just dropped the mic there right after you said that. Yeah, I mean, I think VR and AR, they come with their own challenges in certain way. There's certain things that would be taken into account with VR and AR, like things like field of view and things like that. So I think in a lot of ways there's steps to be taken there. But I agree with what Zach said. It depends on, with that, what experience do you want to get? Do you want to engage with that ad in the middle of gameplay? Or how do you want that ad to be personalized to the environment? Like, do you want a branded item that's there that you can pick up and play with, or do you want that to, do you not want it to interrupt the gameplay of the environment you're in? It's similar to, how we're approaching, in game today. So I think it's something that, if done the right way, I think it is definitely can be the future of gaming, but I think it has to be, once again, made to ensure that user experience is first and foremost.
I think we have another couple of questions. Yep.
Yeah. Todd Keats from Beeswax. I think my question's around sort of as a new format emerges in gaming, we've sort of seen the same things happen with other formats in CTV, obviously broadcast television coming into CTV as well. I'm curious about sort of the dichotomy between wanting to make it standardized and look the same to DSPs and buyers, but also finding ways to make it look different. Just curious to hear how you're thinking about that.
Yeah. First of all, we need to identify that the ad requests that we're getting or the traffic that you're receiving from a publisher to the DSP is actually a game or not a game. Right, so if we start there, then we can very easily delineate kind of from there, okay, what game genre is it? What is the game rating? Is it multiplayer? Is a single player game? What are some things? You probably can pass so many details, right?
Yeah, and I think we talked a little bit about this during actually the prep calls, because Aditi and I kind of bounced off each other. I was like, as a publisher, I'll send whatever data it is that I have. I think what we're not seeing is what's actually transacting, because we don't know what the DSP specifically want exactly. And so each DSP also has their own different definitions or their own different parameters that they're actually specifically looking for in the RTB request. But if you told me, like, I want specific content gaming, these are the categories that we should be breaking out. So maybe it's an IAB initiative in terms of like breaking out specific gaming content categories, then I will identify all of like my sites in those verticals and pass it that way. But
We actually just updated the content taxonomy for all the gaming categories. So,
awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, well, so then.
And the idea isn't to just make it look like everything else, right? It's to have intentional buying, for an advertiser to know exactly what they're purchasing and make the ad units or the creative that you're putting there make sense with the actual and kind of gameplay. So being intentional about that, discoverability is what I want to solve for. Then you can kind of say, how does this work in tandem to my CTV buy? What do I need to do different from that isn't working for this? Or you can do more interesting stuff like, oh, I want to find people who are watching arts and entertainment shows. Cool, I also know that those folks index high for racing games. Maybe I should target those folks there too. So you want to be able to see this as like a holistic strategy, and then thereafter be able to use all the exciting attribution qualities to track incremental reach and path to conversion, right? That's what we want. So
Yeah, I think you want to standardize things like measurement, being able to find the audience, how you're delivering or trafficking the ad. I think it's important to keep is each gaming community is different. You can't it's not just a one size fits all. If you see a brand that's had success and you can't just replicate that across everything. Are we out of time?
I think it's time to have some more refreshments.
I think it's time to play games and drink.
Yeah.
So thank you everybody for hosting us.